Hello again and welcome to another episode of the Aronnax podcast. I'm Craig Eason from Fathom World and your podcast host. Now in this episode we go to Spain, to Barcelona, because it's here that a relatively young company has begun to make waves, having now installed a wind assist technology on a second vessel as it pushes ahead with its plans to join the growing market for fossil fuel-free power solutions. The company is Bound4Blue, founded in 2006, but not by nautical engineers, but aeronautical ones who had an original dream of using wind power in vessels to create electricity, and that electricity generates renewable fuels. Over the last 15 years, the company's not only adapted its plans, focusing on the energy potential of a rigid Wingsail solution, and how it can be a solution into the maritime market, but managed to go from strength to strength. Entrepreneurs and those with novel ideas will know all too well how hard it is to get traction in a new market. There is the overwhelming and continual need to raise financial support to be able to focus on a challenge while also looking at winning grants or investment from angel investors or venture capitalists, or as so many will also know, from families, friends and fools. But even with initial financial support, the challenges never go away. Startup financing inevitably is for research and development or for specific projects. It's not always for commercialization. At some point, any company with a product to sell has to take an idea on paper or a software design program and move from scale models to demonstration projects to then sourcing, contracting, materials, suppliers and construction, assuming that the orders will come. It's called the Valley of Death, and where an entrepreneur startup with a fantastic product could easily become stuck and fold. The product is tested, the product's ready, and all that's needed is the markets to buy it. And if the product is an extremely visible one, and the market is traditionally very conservative, the challenge is all the greater. And this is where Bound4Blue is now. It's got a second system installed and is now investing in ramping up. It's been successful in raising money, but knows it needs more. So I spoke to two of the co-founders about the journey so far and how they're ramping up, particularly how they look for suppliers to make the systems, ensure they have the funding to move forward and expand. Christina Alexandri is COO, Chief Operating Officer, and David Ferrer is Chief Technology Officer, CTO. My first question to Christina was how they got their first moonshot idea to look at clean energy production, and then were able to adapt it to providing clean power solutions for shipping, and still keep their initial investors enthusiastic.
I think that the point is that we are all aeronautical engineers, so we saw that the sailing had a huge power. So we saw that in our industry there was like this solution for the maritime industry. But the thing is that we had an even bigger idea. So it was a moonshot, and we thought applying these wingsails to produce hydrogen and oxygen in a renewable way and with a lower cost than the current methods today. But then we realized that we had a solution. We had invented a modern sail that could be applied directly for shipping to reduce their fuel consumption and emissions, and that's exactly what we've done. And how this idea came up, it was Jose watching a documentary on the ancient use of sailing.
That's Jose Bermudez, by the way, the CEO of the company, one of the three co-founders.
And he just explained the idea to us, and he was like, "Let's do it."
You say let's do it as if it was just, I don't know, making a toy boat and putting it in a lake or something. But making a vessel, even at that stage, making a vessel particularly to generate the electricity to create hydrogen, that's no small feat. So even at that point, okay, you've changed direction since, but how did you then go about trying to realize that moonshot dream? How did you manage to go and even talk to any financiers, backers, or anybody like that to say, hey, look, we've got this moonshot wild idea, but hey, how about it?
We started with different projects during university. So my final project career was about the first concept of Bound4Blue, generating hydrogen and the use of these sails to generate energy. And we followed up engaging with bigger companies like the National Center here of Hydrogen in Spain. And we started developing projects with other research institutions too, to find if there was a viable way to perform it in terms of technology and in terms of costs. And it took us like about 1.5 years to realize that it was really possible and to really nail it and find the best solution. So that I still remember that the first idea we had was storing this energy in batteries, but then we realized it was not that efficient. So we even went a step farther, and we didn't only study hydrogen, but also ammonia and other types of fuel to store this energy. And then later on, we realized it was a very big project which needed a huge amount of financing, and that we could market our sails, which were also going to be used to generate this energy, and get some revenue also from it. So we divided the project in these 2 phases. And the first part, like the first funding that entered into Bound4Blue, was to fund this moonshot. So it was not for the sails to reduce fuel consumption in shipping, but rather to produce energy. So quite curious in that.
So you then realized that, okay, we've got these sail designs and perhaps we can move faster and quicker with the design of these sails into the industry. How did you go about that? You must have gone to your investors and said, hey, look, we're changing our path now. How do you go to people that are organizations that are investing in Bound4Blue and say, look, this is what we're going to do now?
I think that at that stage, what we had inside the company as shareholders were business angels that were more open-minded. They were not VCs like more focused on a thematic or market. And it was pretty simple because when we had confidence later on, I asked them why did they invested in Bound4Blue, and it was not because of what we wanted to do, our moonshot, which obviously had sense, but because of the team behind. So they believed that if it had sense for us to divide the project and to focus on this stage, then they were going to support us in this decision. So I believe that it was because we did it at an early stage with not that much shareholders, and because they believed more and they funded the company because of the team rather than because of what we had, because it was more like a PowerPoint and a lot of data that we had and analysis, but there was not a physical thing behind. So there was a high risk. So they were investing more on the team and the confidence that we could provide them rather than what we had achieved at that moment.
So David, you're the CTO, so you've got the finger on the technology of these 2 sails that you've got. You've got an Esail and a Wingsail design. The Esail is currently on 2 vessels. Can you tell me how you came up with these designs, the differences between them? Let's talk a little bit about the difference as well, or how they work as well, and what they how they differ, so that we can get a picture of where you see them being applied within the maritime sector.
Okay, yeah, we started with what we call the foldable Wingsail, which is being, let's say, very simple. It's just like an airplane wing installed in vertical, so completely passive, etc. The thing is that its aerodynamic characteristics makes it necessary to for it to be a little bit larger, so they have to be foldable. This can be an advantage or can be a disadvantage depending on the vessel, because if your vessel does require the folding or the collapsibility of your sail, it's a great advantage. But analyzing in detail the whole market, what we saw is that some vessels do need the collapsibility and other vessels do not need it if you're able to have a not very large system. Having a not very large system means having a larger lift coefficient. This is the capacity of producing thrust per square meter.
That's the same way as if an airplane wing, if it was horizontal, would create the lift.
Exactly.
The airplane. Okay.
So we were looking at how can we make a high lift device. And basically, there are 2 technologies that can do that: the flatner rotors and the suction sails. And after analyzing both technologies, we saw that the Esail, or the suction sail, was the best option. So we started developing that like 3 years ago. And basically, it's a system that has a higher lift coefficient, and this allows us to have a smaller sail. So having a smaller sail has advantages like their size is smaller, so less air draft, less weight, less mechanism, less cost, and you can put more units on a vessel because the interference with visibility, lights, etc. is lower. So on wide large amount of the vessels in the market that we're focusing, this is the best solution. We do have the two technologies because some vessels do need foldability. So in that case, we would offer the foldable Wingsail.
What's the technology with the suction sail then? Why is it called a suction sail?
It's basically the limitation on a sail is when the flow detaches from its surface. So with the suction, basically what you're doing is to suck a little bit of air at the point where the flow would detach to keep it attached to the sail. So thanks to that, you can go to different shapes and different positions of the sail without this detachment, which allows you to get higher lift coefficient.
So that requires a sort of motor or something to be able to create that suction.
Exactly. You need a fan that sucks the air from what we call the boundary layer. Don't think about we are sucking all the air from the external part of the sail. We're just sucking a small amount to keep it attached. But yeah, you need some electric power.
So you've managed to secure two, I would call them demonstration projects, because I think when we look at the wind assist industry as it stands today, there's still a lot of feeling of the nascency of the industry and the need for it to get as many demonstrations, as many real vessels out on the water to show that the technologies work. So these are the two. One of them is this rather novel theatre vessel that you've just announced you're installing on, and there was an earlier vessel as well, wasn't it? A fishing vessel or something with the two. So you're building up experience now with the Esail. So what about the Wingsail? When are we expecting to see a first Wingsail of yours on the water?
Well, as said, the vast majority of the market, the Esail is going to be more suitable for them. So in fact, our focus right now is to do these piloting projects on the different types of vessels that we consider relevant for the market. And being the fishing vessel one of them, the general cargo, like the theater vessel, is the other one. We're now moving forward on different types of vessels, tankers, bulk carriers, larger general cargo vessel, a ro-ro, etc. And depending on the requirements of the vessels that we're going to find as these, let's say, early adopters willing to do these piloting projects, we will select the optimal technology. In fact, we are not, what we're selling is wind-assisted propulsion systems to our customers. Our first step is to analyze for them what we call the optimal wing-assisted propulsion configuration for your vessel, depending on your requirements. And one of the first things is selecting which is the best technology for your case. So it's going to be a case by case, or depending on the vessel that is coming, we will select one technology or the other. So that's going to depend a little bit on the market.
Well, one of the biggest challenges that we've seen with any sort of engineering startup like Bound4Blue or any of the others is the incredible amount of costs up front for a company, particularly when you go from this. And I think this is where you are. You're at the point where you've got the demonstrations in the water. You've gone from the research and design and development stage, and you're now in this kind of almost at the cusp of this commercialization realization. Sometimes it's called the valley of death. You need to get this money in to be able to fulfill orders if they come in. But until you get the orders, you haven't got the money to buy. Christina, how are you looking at that kind of conundrum of being able to expand into the market, a market which we see there's growing appetite, but at the same time you realize you need the capital to be able to ramp up manufacturing, find the suppliers, build in the partners that you need for that construction phase?
So in order to get to install the first unit, the fishing vessel, we needed like about 5 million euros for the company. And then during the summer of 2021, we raised 5 million euros to perform the last installation and further ones. And this forms part of a bigger funding round of 20 million euros, coming around the half of it from the European Innovation Council. So Bound4Blue is one of the companies that is going to receive this funding, and this funding will not only enable us to go to bigger vessels to perform more than one sails on installations on vessels, and that implies also going to the commercial stage. So that's funding to reach this and go through this valley of death.
Do you see this being a big challenge in terms of finding the technology firms that you can then trust with your concept? Because to a certain extent, I imagine that you are not the ones that are going to be building the wing sails. You're going to be using some suppliers to build the wing sails, to provide the software to monitor, because I believe one of the things, and I've seen this across the industry, there's a sort of savings kind of sharing arrangement, so to pay for the system, which again must limit the amount of income you get unless you've got some sort of go-between. So when it comes to the suppliers, David, who's going to build your wing sails? Who's going to build your Esails?
Yeah, just as what you're saying, we are within Bound4Blue, we are retaining what adds value. So what we're retaining is the engineering, the design of the sails, of the autonomous control system, of the performance monitoring software, etc., etc. But the manufacturing, I mean, there are plenty of companies around the world, in Europe especially, that are experts in large steel and metallic structures manufacturing. So we are doing our design already since the beginning with the idea of how can we manufacture that in an easy, cheap way, which can in fact not only being manufactured as a single unit, but somehow in a production line. So just to give you an example, the Esail itself, it's basically a tube, what we call a monocoque structure. So it's basically a tube, which is very similar to the tower of the wind
wind
turbines. Yeah. So it's basically like a tower. Okay. It could have been improved in terms of weight. There are other technology, etc. But if you want to manufacture them like in a production line, this is very useful because there are many companies in Spain that are specialized in manufacturing these offshore technology. So they perfectly know on how to manufacture that quick, cheap, and especially with a high quality. And this gives us a lot of flexibility in terms of what you were saying, scaling up, how you're going to go from the prototype to the to several units. So we can do that with these companies. They already have the experience, and it's a good way also of, let's say, scaling up in terms of in terms of geography. We can manufacture in Europe for Europe, but we can manufacture in Asia for Asia. So we think that going with this kind of suppliers gives us a lot of flexibility and speed ups our the commercialization of the technology.
I would also say that for the shipyards, it's pretty similar. So they don't need extra capabilities to install the technology. So it's something they're used to. So similar to a crane boom. And then also regarding the maintenance activities that the sail would need, these companies that are manufacturing our sails also have the capabilities to offer the maintenance because they're doing it at a worldwide level for wind turbines. So that's something that makes it really easy in order to scale up the company.
As you go into 2022, having had this, I'd say, quite progressive 2021, I think there's a lot of people that had a very bad 2021. It sounds like you had an extremely good one in terms of the development of Bound4Blue. So how are you going to make further inroads into the maritime sector? How do you find the appetite for your services in a sector that has traditionally been extremely conservative?
I would say that when we started, at least, there was much more resistance than now. And I believe this has to do also with the International Maritime Organization regulations, the ones that are coming up. And therefore, we are seeing quite a different perspective in the market. We have the first installations, and that has been really, really useful. I mean, for the Naumon vessel, it's a small cargo vessel, in fact, and by installing our technology there, we have had a lot of inquiries regarding installations on that segment. So as soon as we have the first installations on the different types of segments that David mentioned before, that really opens much more doors than what we had at the beginning of Bound4Blue.
There's been a huge mindset, in fact, in the industry. When we started in 2014, they were kind of, the ship owners, they were willing to listen, basically due to the regulations that were gonna come in, but they were like, well, this is a nice PowerPoint, but we'll see. Now that there's been a shift in the mindset, I think everyone in this industry assumes and accepts that wind propulsion is going to be there, and it's just about which technology is the best one. So having these pilots helped a lot to position Bound4Blue as a viable option. So we're getting a lot of interest from the market.
Also, something that really helps is offering the technology not only as a hardware but as a service, so rather sharing these savings with an external investor. And at the beginning for Bound4Blue, it was very difficult to engage with these investors. We had no data of the installations. We had neither developed the technology, but now at that point, we've been throughout the last years working with private investors and bigger VCs funds in order to offer this technology as a service, which obviously increases the market acceptance and adoption of the technology.
Are you finding that the competition is growing with you?
It's true that there are plenty of, let's say, potential suppliers, obviously at different levels of development. There are many suppliers that are at the same level as we were back in 2014, so they have an idea and a PowerPoint. At a level where we are with already installations, there are just a handful of options. And as I always say, for me, it's positive to have this kind of competence right now, because as I said, this shift in the mindset has been done thanks to successful installations. So any installation right now of any competitor just gives more confidence in the wind and sister propulsion industry. So it helps us. So right now I'm really happy of any success of the other technologies. I cross my fingers that there will not be any failure, because that's also going to affect everyone. But right now I'm really happy. So we collaborate with this competence in projects. In fact, in the International Wingsail Association, in the end, we are collaborating all together.
This is the Aronnax podcast, the podcast about the transformation of the shipping and ocean space.
That was David Ferrer and Cristina Alexandri, two of the co-founders of Bound4Blue in Spain. And if you want to know more about the technology, there's links in the show notes and on Fathom.World, where you will find a growing list of stories about wind assist and new wind propulsion systems that are reshaping shipping. There's a growing back catalogue of podcast episodes as well, where I've spoken to other companies and entrepreneurs building up wind assist or full sail solutions, doing their own thing to help shipping decarbonise. Recently, Di Gilpin joined me after returning home from a fruitful visit to COP26 in Glasgow. And last year I spoke to Daniel Doggett, who's leading Sail Cargo, a team building a sailing ship in the jungles of Costa Rica, which will sail green cargoes up and down the west coast of the USA and Canada. I've also spoken to Valenius Wilhelmsen in Scandinavia about the Oceanbird concept, a wind-powered car carrier. Another company with some bright ideas on paper, Bar Technologies in the UK, were also guests, and Airseas, the French company with a huge kite solution, has also featured, as has EconoWind in the Netherlands, and Blue Technology, an idea in Denmark for a full-sail cargo vessel and a Wingsail the size of a Boeing 747's wing. All these guests and topics can be found in the back catalogue of Aronnax episodes, and even more stories can be found on Fathom World, of course. Yes, shameless plug, I don't care. That's really what this podcast is about, promoting the news and stories that are transforming the maritime and shipping industries. Now, there have been a few other stories making the news over the last week. The International Renewable Energy Association has published new data and a report pointing to how green hydrogen production can become a real game changer as new hydrogen trade routes open up and traditional refined hydrocarbons decline. And finally, the Global Maritime Forum, the Danish organisation rapidly becoming one of the driving forces pushing the decarbonisation agenda, notably through its Getting to Zero coalition, has published a report outlining what it sees as policy measures to close the competitive gap between clean fuels and fossil fuels. GMF said in its press release that there needs to be price parity between the fuels to encourage take-up. New fuels such as hydrogen, ammonia and methanol are being seen as fuels of the future for different shipping segments, but their production using renewable resources is still more costly than the tax-free bunkers used today. Ship owners won't turn to these fuels unless they feel that first, it's something every other owner's doing, and secondly, and that it will not hurt their pockets. GMF's key idea is, of course, a carbon price on fuel, starting low and gradually ramping up to $200, and then a market-based measure with revenues generated to help the transition. Well, that's it for this episode of the Aronnax podcast. Many thanks for downloading and listening, and come back next time for an interview, hopefully with someone working to build a fleet of hydrogen-powered exploration cruise ships. So subscribe, follow and like this podcast, share it with your friends and colleagues, and you can also become a Patreon of the podcast, helping support its growth. And remember also to visit Fathom World, where you can read more news about the transformation and transition, and subscribe to the Fathom World newsletter. That's it for this episode. Goodbye.